Welcome back to another episode of Deconstructing Digital, the podcast where we deconstruct the opportunities and challenges that the built environment face when digitalising their processes. Today, I'm privileged to be joined by Lucy Wright, who wears many hats, so I'll hand over to introduce herself.
Morning, Amelia. Thank you so much for having me on. It's always quite difficult to put me into a box because I do quite a different number of things, but today I guess the focus is that I head up the construction technology and property technology practice for Amelia at Beaumont Bailey, which is an executive search firm focusing on sort of the built environment. And also alongside that, I do a lot within sort of women in construction and construction technology as well.
Excellent. So what we're keen to focus on today is bridging the skills gap. So as we know, people are what make services industries such as construction succeed or fail. And one of the things that we found through digital transformation is that can be a real enabler for that workforce. So what I'm really keen to understand, Lucy, is with the skills gap as a major challenge, what role do you really see digital transformation playing in reshaping how we recruit and retain talent in the construction industry?
Big question to start us off there, Amelia. Great question. Firstly, I completely agree. It is a major challenge, if not the biggest challenge across the industry. It's one of those ones where I almost like to sort of flip it on its head, and it's not necessarily about how we recruit, it's how it looks across the industry as is. Something that I talk a lot about with my clients and customers is education, because it's obviously, as we all know, it's quite a fragmented industry. It's a pretty big industry with many different silos, which involves a lot of different people, which also involves a lot of different skills. And so that can be a really big challenge to kind of try to put everyone in one box of how we educate the digital transformation. I think in terms of a recruitment point of view, some things that I've sort of recently been chatting to some sort of senior individuals across the industry is education at different points of someone's career. You know, if we take from sort of those first steps, apprenticeships, is there a space for us to be talking about integrating digital skills as well as that craftsmanship, so that when they are going up through the ranks, they're sort of coming up with those skills already to hand. Now, that one tends to be probably the easiest education piece because from a age demographic point of view, they tend to be more tech savvy. They tend to just see the benefit as well, which is something that I'm keen to sort of touch on later. And then you've got, as you sort of go through the process of someone's career. And I think that's where leaders need to sort of really be putting their front foot first in how can we engage the workforce to really use technology and understand the benefits. I think there's definitely a conversation to be had that the people who make the decision of what technology is going to be brought into a business are not the people who are necessarily going to be using it. So is there a mixture of a top-down and a middle-up conversation that needs to be had on, what's useful, what's not? And with that comes a big piece of the puzzle, which is super users. They are the key to unlocking really that skills gap, because if you've got someone on site, as an example, who is super passionate about using it, really understands that actually it's making their day-to-day life so much easier, that's going to be a big tick in the box. Sorry, I feel like I've gone off piece a bit there.
No, I think what was absolutely excellent there, right? What we were talking about is how can digital transformation really reshape how we retain the talent within the construction industry? And what I absolutely loved about your answer was that actually if we use those digital tools to help to drive education from cradle to grave throughout someone's career, then you're going to develop and retain that talent and keep them maintained within the industry. What's also excellent is it's not just about the digital tool itself, but how do you have leaders that empower that and bring that in from the beginning? And then you also talked about the enablers for digital transformation through the use of super users. How do you actually get it adopted and utilized within your business? So I think a fantastic answer, and really is a lovely segue into building a sustainable workforce. So this is all around, I think you've really touched upon it in the fact that it's how do you bring people into the industry that want to grow and maintain it. But do you have any other thoughts on particular digital tools or platforms that really can help to develop that sort of sustainable workforce and people that are keen to remain within the construction industry?
Yeah, so in terms of actual tools themselves, I think it really depends on business to business and what kind of digital tool we're talking about from an adoption. I think something that's really important to touch on, and I did very briefly in that first answer, is that people learn very differently. We're the people who are going to be using the technology, as a sweeping generalization, are people who are practical, use their hands all the time. They are not necessarily going to learn by sitting down and like watching a module on, e-learning. So I think it's really about understanding who the demographic is in your business that you're wanting to utilize whichever technology we're talking about, whether that's BIM, project management, etc., etc. And it might be that each one of those groups needs a different form of education tool. And in my opinion, it's really worth taking the time to really think about that, because, are they likely to sit down every afternoon and do one module a week, and then at the end of 6 months you go, okay, you're all up and running? They're going to necessarily remember what they did at the beginning of that 6 months, versus other people who, if you sit at your desk and are on your computer all the time, that lends itself to more of that kind of setup. So I think it's really up to leaders just to make sure that they're really thinking about the demographic of who they're actually wanting to utilize the technology, to then sort of take a step back and work out what tools to use.
Couldn't agree more. When I'm engaging with my customers on their digital journeys and what they're trying to achieve, it's always around that end user has got to be at the heart of it, because there's no point putting any of these different solutions in place if people aren't going to embrace it and see the value in it themselves, because ultimately it's about making their jobs easier and ensuring that they're more efficient. When it comes to efficiency, what do you think is the place for digital enhancements to really help the industry become more efficient? Have you seen particular themes on areas or particular skills that can be developed that you really think have helped to drive efficiency via digitalization?
Yeah, and I think this is a really interesting point as well when we talk about sort of the adoption piece too, because I think that communication has so far been quite lacking. We sort of, I hate to mention the pandemic, but the pandemic came, there was a bit of a panic. We bought technology and we're like, go ahead and use this, guys. But there wasn't, from what I saw, necessarily the communication from the powers that be down to the guys on the site or end users to really explain to them why they've got the technology. And it sounds really simple, but in such a silo fragmented business, actually quite a lot of that gets missed in translation from what I've seen. And actually being able to explain to an end user, this technology is going to make your job easier. And this is why X, Y, and Z. I feel like that is actually a really easy step. And if people put that into practice, we would see a difference quite quickly on that piece. But in terms of, I think safety is a massive thing in terms of enhancing day-to-day life for people on site. I think there's a place for all of the technology, right? Because otherwise it wouldn't be there. I do think as well, sorry, again, I'm sort of going off on a silo, but I could talk about this forever. But in terms of enhancing someone's day-to-day role, you think there's a larger conversation to be had there. I think especially for the very experienced people, there is a worry and a fear that their job is going to be replaced by technology. And again, it's that communication of, no, this enables you to do your role easier, quicker, more safely. And it shouldn't be a worry that your role is going to be at risk because of this technology. And I'm not sure there's that much communication around that, because no one wants to admit that they're worried their job's going to get taken over by robots or something.
It's such an interesting point and theme there, because one of the key things when we're looking at digital solutions is about having business cases that stack up. I think legacy view often was looking at reductions in headcount potentially, but that's really shifted. It's now about actually doing more with the same, or empowering people to be able to do things better. It's a real pivot is what I've seen, and that actually investing in people's skills and their capabilities to then enable them to utilize that technology to be able to do more. And I think that's really exciting, because there's such aggressive growth targets and great opportunities especially within the UK at the moment. And it's how businesses are enhancing that is through empowering their people, as you say, which I think is really impressive.
Yeah, I really agree, Amelia. I think that shift in the last sort of 5 years or so has just become more and more apparent. I totally agree. Yeah.
And I think that real focus of people first and putting people at the heart of it, one of the things that really jumps out at me when I'm talking to the customers that I work with is the importance of like ESG agendas, so environmental, social, and governance components. And one of the real key parts of that, and you touched upon it earlier, is safety. So safety obviously remains one of the top priorities that different companies have when it comes to the work that they're delivering. Do you see a particular part that digital transformation can play in enhancing safety protocols? And do you think there's specific training potentially that people can be doing to help to make the places where people work safer?
Yeah, so I think that there's some great technology out there from a safety perspective. For me, the whole ESG side of things, it's so tricky, because there is a side to technology where people just put the word ESG or AI in the front of things, and then when you really dig under, it doesn't necessarily come across as that's a thing. For me, the technology that I find really interesting from a safety perspective is the data, not just being the technology where it not only pulls the data, but also showcases you can do lots of different things with that data. And I think that's where the important changes for health and safety will come about, because it gives us the knowledge in which to, change things up. I think a really interesting part of, the ESG side of things that I'm doing a lot of work in at the moment is the building materials and how we can make that more, carbon neutral. And I think it's just everyone being really open to change and open to communication again between, something that I have to say I love about the construction technology industry is, in general, people are very happy to share best practice, lots of different scale ups talking to each other, bigger businesses getting involved in scale ups as well. And it does foster a collaboration across the industry, which in my opinion is like the most important way we're going to hit those carbon neutral goals that we all want. And I think that's a really nice thing about the industry, I have to say, which is different to other industries from speaking to, other colleagues and things. But I have to say, the collaboration on those goals, I think, is key as well.
That ecosystem is just so powerful. And that is where, and also people is at the center of that. It's not just about the materials and the goods, but actually the labor force and the skills within that. And I think that's why investment within our people is so important, because they can work for so many different companies within that, working on different projects. And the more empowered and skilled those individuals are, then the better outcomes that it is for the business. What I loved about your answer there with regards to safety as well, is that whole point about being data driven, that ability to move from being reactive to proactive. So have you got that understanding of a particular type of work the people are doing? Have they got the right skills? What materials are they using? How likely is there being an accident or an incident? And then using that to be able to understand trends to then proactively address them, I think is excellent. You touched upon the environmental impact piece, which I think is still something very prevalent in our minds, right? Getting to those net zero targets that we've all set. When it comes to environmental, obviously we've got technology out there that's starting to look at how we're capturing carbon. What do you think is important from a skills perspective for our people and nurturing talent so that they understand how to be more sustainable and eco-friendly? Do you think that that's a key part as well, as in actually looking at how we develop our people and get them informed earlier on around best practices when it comes to environmental impact?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think sort of the key theme from what we're both saying, Amelia, is communication and education are the two key factors of all of these kinds of adoption conversations. I think that in particular, that being able to just be way more efficient on site, as an example, so that two parties, two completely different, skill sets aren't coming on the same day, that saved a heap loads of petrol, at a very simple level. And so enabling those guys to be able to use that technology so that they aren't arriving on site at the same time and not able to do anything at a very basic level, that does all help. And so, yeah, I think there is also just a wider education on the environment. We're still all learning, I would say. I was at an event not that long ago where the partner was handing out like plastic water bottles, and it was actually sponsored by a carbon neutral company. And you think they've just done that because that's just what's been the norm to do. So there's no, and I think being positive about doing better rather than judging to be like, we shouldn't have done that. But it's like, okay, well, next time let's think about something that's perhaps a bit more environmentally friendly. It's small things like that as well that you pick up on, and you realize that it's quite easy sitting on this side of the fence to think to ourselves that, everyone's in the know about everything to do with ESG, whereas actually there is so much learning to be done, both on this side of the fence, but even more so on the traditional side, where it's just not necessarily front and center of every single person's mind. Whereas you and I, who perhaps talk about, different technologies day in, day out, that would be quite at the forefront of our mind. And so again, just coming back to that communication, education, like having those conversations really, positive, proactive way. And I think is key, really.
So when it comes to, I think we've covered on some really great themes there, but to kind of summarize what I think we've covered off with regards to bridging of the skills gap piece, particularly, it's about understanding that end user and what they need to be able to perform better at that role. That can be done through digital education tools or through what we're trying to actually implement solution-wise. So explaining to them why it makes a positive difference to them, whether that be about being more efficient or being more safe in the activity that we've talked about. We've also talked on the importance of leadership to really embrace what any digital solutions that are being forward and translating that into language that end users understand and are excited about embracing. And we've also touched upon the fact that there are brand new skills that we need to be learning and that we're getting at the forefront of people's mind, how to be carbon neutral, what it means to reduce environmental impact, and getting that to be first nature rather than an afterthought, which I think is excellent. So as we all know, digital transformation can be incredibly challenging but rewarding journey. When you look at your career, what's the one thing you know now that you wish you'd knew at the very beginning, or piece of advice that you would give to people who are starting on that digital transformation piece?
I think being open-minded, to be honest, is sort of the main one. I think it's, before I got into sort of construction technology, I literally obviously had no clue about any of this stuff. And I still learn every day. And I think that's really something that goes across the whole industry. Even if you are an expert in technology, the technology changes. So education needs to be continuous, and everyone needs to sort of stay open-minded and also sort of working together, I think, across the industry. As I mentioned earlier, I do think we are quite good at that already, but continuing down that. But yeah, having an open mind, I think, to different technologies, I would say.
Well, thank you so much, Lucy, for joining us on Deconstructing Digital today. And we did it. We deconstructed digital.
Thanks so much for having me, Amelia.